out to Katie LaPerry. Would you send the link to the meeting to her?
Absolutely.
She was looking to.
I believe I sent it to her because I saw her on the agenda, but I will make sure she has it.
Oh, okay.
And you're live now and ready to go.
Okay. I'll call to order the Planning Committee meeting for September 28th, 2020. We'll do a quick roll call here. I'm Dave Risberger. I'm here. Councilman Mark Davies.
Here.
Councilman Len Carson.
Here.
And Councilman Mark Drenick.
Here.
Okay. Did everybody get the minutes from the last meeting? Any questions at all? Concerns? Okay. We have 3 topics today, maybe a little bit more. First one is the zombie land bank presentation. So Judy, if you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Let me introduce Hans Drews from the land bank. It says Tolga, but that's not Tolga.
No, it's not Tolga. It's me.
So Hans is what's called the zombie quarterback for the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank, and I'll turn it over to him in a second. But let me just introduce what the topic is. The land bank. I'm on the board of the land bank, by the way. The city is participating with the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank, and they recently received a Zombie 2.0 grant, which actually the applicant was the town of Herkimer, and the city is one of the co-applicants along with the village of Herkimer and the village of Ilion. Any funding with the grant is actually going through the town of Herkimer. But we and the other communities that I just named will be able to take advantage of some of the aspects of the grant in terms of having Hans's help as the zombie quarterback, and there will also be some code officers that the land bank will hire that will be available to help us as well with our zombie properties. So what we wanted to talk about today is we have a contract that we need to sign as a co-applicant, which is for the land bank to administer the Zombie 2.0 grant for the town of Herkimer. But because we're co-applicant to the grant, we also need to sign off on that contract. So basically, we won't have much to do with the grant or the funding other than being the recipient of some assistance. So Hans, if you want to add to that, and then if you guys have any questions, we can, between Hans and I, can answer your questions about the land bank and the zombie grant.
Sure, yeah, I'd like to just say just a few things about the grant, just in general. As Judy noted, the town of Herkimer is the primary applicant. However, the grant is written such that it is a regional grant covering the counties of Oneonta, Herkimer, or Otsego, Herkimer, Montgomery, and Schoharie. So it's a regional grant with all 4 counties receiving benefit from the grant. The primary goal of the grant is to basically collect data to identify, inventory, and assess vacant and abandoned 1 to 4 family homes in the area. We have purchased software that allows us to hold this data and to map the homes and to give our assessment of them, whether they're in good condition or poor condition, ranging from move-in ready all the way down to it needs demolition as soon as possible. The goal for gathering that information is to assist local municipalities from the county on down to the smallest towns in developing a strategy to deal with those properties, and also to hopefully identify some of the reasons that those properties become vacant and abandoned, so that we can avoid more of this happening with more properties in the future. As Judy also mentioned, we have actually already hired 2 code enforcement officers. They're on staff right now, and they are doing the work of gathering some of that data, identifying the homes and assessing their conditions. And in the very near future, we anticipate them being able to transition to providing assistance and support to local municipalities that want to participate for code enforcement applicable specifically to these vacant and abandoned homes that we're identifying. We also hope to provide foreclosure assistance to any citizens in the region, any homeowners in the region that are at risk of foreclosure on their homes, in the hopes of, again, avoiding additional future vacancy and abandonment. We're looking to establish a website whereby people can access that, and also where people will be able to report to us if they have identified themselves a vacant and abandoned home in their neighborhood. They would be able to provide us with the address, and we would then do the research to determine if it is indeed vacant and abandoned. We have done some research prior to me coming on board, actually, to create a vacant property law that we consider a model law. Now, I understand the city of Oneonta already has a vacant property law and a vacant property registry in place, so that's fantastic. However, as a part of that, we also have access to legal counsel using the grant funds, so that if you were struggling with enforcement of that or other issues with vacant and abandoned homes, we would be able to access that legal counsel on your behalf as a part of the grant. Finally, there are grant funds that are available. There's a kind of a small pool of funds that are available for municipalities to access if they choose to participate, that would allow them to use the funds for summary abatement of issues where immediate repair is needed for public safety on vacant and abandoned homes. So those are the primary goals. One other thing with legal counsel, we have had legal counsel develop a guide to Article 19A, which allows municipalities to foreclose on properties. It allows them an expedited foreclosure process of properties that are presenting an issue. If it's vacant and abandoned, they can take the home and enact immediate repairs or demolish if necessary in order to ensure public safety and to make sure that the home is dealt with as quickly as possible. So that's basically the zombie grant in a nutshell. So as Judy mentioned, we have a contract with the town of Herkimer to complete the goals of the grant. And as a co-applicant and part of the grant process, we're delivering that contract to you guys to sign it as a co-applicant. So that's all I have. And unless anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Hans. Does anybody here have any questions for Hans? I have one, but I want to open it up to, go ahead, Mark. We can't hear you, Mark. You're muted.
I'm doing my best John Rafter here. Anyway, yeah, so the question is, the deployment of code enforcement officers, essentially identifiers of homes that can or need help. You had said 2 within the context of this. Is that 2 per community, 2 per county, 2 entirely?
That's 2 entirely. And we're looking for participation from municipalities. We're not going to go in and start doing code enforcement in a municipality that doesn't want us doing that.
Yeah, sure.
We are identifying vacant and abandoned homes in those communities, but until a community asks us to participate in their code enforcement process, we would not go in unwelcomed.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on that, how do you go about finding permission, finding out if it's needed, if assistance is needed from a local municipality's code enforcement?
Sure, a good question. We have in development right now a intermunicipal agreement that will allow us to act on behalf of the community. And once that has gone through legal counsel and been finalized in its final format, we will be initiating contact with local municipalities in order to present that agreement and to present the possibility of sharing in those code enforcement services.
Okay. Thanks. Does anybody else have any other questions? Go ahead, Len.
Hans, what is the need for this agreement between the city of Oneonta and your organization? You already have one with the counties, so we work with the county. Doesn't that just overlay into that?
Well, this agreement that you guys are going to be executing specifically addresses this Zombie 2.0 grant. It's not an agreement necessarily between the land bank for land bank services. It's an agreement between the town of Herkimer and the other co-applicants, the city of Oneonta being one, to allow the land bank to act on your behalf to complete the goals of the grant.
Okay.
Okay. And what's the time frame on this, Hans? When do you expect to be able to start collecting data?
We have already started collecting data. We have compiled a list already from several different communities that is about 200 to 250 homes long. And some of that has been contributed from other nonprofit organizations that act on behalf of their particular communities. Some of it has come from municipalities, and there are some other sources. And so if we get a list from another organization, we're basically going out and verifying that information, looking at the homes and identifying them and verifying the information we were provided. And then in addition to that, the code enforcement officers right now are doing neighborhood surveys where they're actually driving around and looking for homes that appear to be vacant and abandoned.
And that's in municipalities where they already have the agreement with them and you've already been in touch and they've agreed to let you come in, correct?
No, because we're not doing any code enforcement. We're just driving around and identifying homes. We're doing that just as a blanket for all 4 counties.
Gotcha. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
So the data that's being collected and will be collected, is that something that the municipalities have access to about their own communities? In other words, what's been input from whatever source that jives with their own understandings?
Sure. What we're doing is, like I said, we're using a software called eProperty Plus, and that allows us to store that data and to provide reports and analyze the data and also map the data. So any municipality that wanted the data could ask us for it, and we could generate a report and deliver that via email or on paper.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Oh, Judy.
Yeah, thank you. The land bank has been in touch with Stephen, and Stephen's going to be providing our list to the land bank as well. So
Okay. Okay. So you're just looking for us to give this okay to pass it to the council so we can get a signature on it, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Does anybody here have any objection to this? I think this is a great thing. Katie, you're joining us here. Do you have any questions you want to ask now? You'll have an opportunity later.
Thanks. No, I'm really excited to see some more movement on our vacant abandoned properties. So I'm excited to have some more insight into that and help.
Okay. Hans, thanks for sharing, and we wish you luck. And I think this is a much needed activity for the city of Oneonta. So thank you.
All right, well, I appreciate the offer to provide a list from the city, like Judy mentioned, and we'll look to add that, and then we'll look to, if it's necessary, we'll look to identify more homes in the city and add them to the list as well. And I look forward to working with the city in the future. So,
actually, I've got one last question, because I know I'm going to get asked this by people in my ward, because I know there's at least one house that's been identified in my ward. From the time you identify a house till action is taken on that house, whatever the action may be, what time frame is it usually? Is there a window that you could give us of time that takes place?
That's going to vary drastically from one property to the next. And the zombie grant, unfortunately, isn't really designed to do any kind of hammer and nail work on actual properties. The zombie grant is designed to just gather data
That's it.
in the hope of acting on that data in the future.
Okay,
So,
got it.
yeah. Now, I assume you're going to want me to drop off the meeting so that you guys can continue on.
And unless you have this burning desire to listen to us drone on, sure.
Okay.
No, you can take off if you want to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to records retention schedule. Carrie, are you there?
I am here. And speaking of droning, that's pretty much what this is going to be, records retention. It's not that exciting, I'm sorry. So this is the new LGS1. It is 411 pages of types of records that are retained in records retention in local government. This document indicates the minimum length of time that we must retain documents before we can dispose of them. And essentially it serves four primary purposes. Number one, it ensures records that are held for as long as they are required for administrative, financial, legal reasons. Two, it ensures that any state and federal retention periods are met. Three, it ensures that any records with any historical or research value are identified and retained. For example, anything pre-1910, we have to have permission before we can even think of disposing it. And four, it encourages and facilitates a systemic disposal of any unneeded or unnecessary records. We are currently operating under an MU1 retention schedule and have been since the mid-1970s. So this update was long overdue. And state archives and the state ed department have finally come through as of August of this year. We need to, as a city, adopt the current schedule, or after January 1st, 2021, we will no longer be able to dispose of any records. So I come to you to ask permission to put a resolution forward to the council. It's been drafted, pre-drafted by state archives to ask for permission to do that, just that, adopt this resolution and move to the new recommended records retention schedule.
So this is the biggest update since the 1970s, or the only update since the 1970s?
The only update since the 1970s. And when I say mid, I really think it was early. I want to say it was 72 or 73, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's pretty old.
It is. It's been around a little while. It served us well, but it was time for an update.
Anybody have any questions for Carrie? Anybody that wants to read the 401-page document?
It's online. I'll send you a link. Very light reading.
I'll bet. Okay. If there's no objections, I can't imagine there would be, but if there's no objections, we'll pass this along to the full council. I know what it's like to have to deal with records retention, at least on the medical side. So I know they're very detailed in the rules, and you got to follow them or you get in trouble. So
Thank you very much, everybody.
thanks, Carrie. Okay, moving on. Katie approached me about some concerns about local parking regulations, and I asked her to delve into it a little bit more and focus a little bit on what exactly she wants to change. So I'm going to let Katie speak. So go ahead, Katie.
Sure. So I hope you guys got the email that I sent out this morning that had a little bit of background. I think there are two main things that we need to focus on with regard to parking regulations. One, and I sent an email to Greg and John about um, having sort of a holistic look at the way that the parking regulations work in the city coincide with street maintenance. And Greg got back to me right before the meeting. And so Greg, I don't know if you want to go into a little bit what you had stated in the email, but I'm assuming you guys probably all saw the picture of the street sweeper going around the parked cars. And I know that from Greg's email, that because of staffing and equipment limitations, that right now that's kind of unavoidable. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. And then the second proposal is with regard to a resident parking permit in some of the more dense areas of the city. My cat just unplugged my light. And I've been looking into what other municipalities do with regard to that. And sorry, so back on the first thing, since that's what we're going to talk about first, snow emergencies is also kind of lumped into that. So Greg, I don't know if you want to kind of summarize the email and kind of the situation with DPW at the moment, and then we can get into conversation around the parking regulations in the city. Thanks.
Sure. I think the two are tied together, and I think the parking regulations are really what need to be addressed, and the street sweeping would be a component of that. And we would, if we're looking at a citywide parking regulation update, we want to look at the street sweeping as a component. Our alternate side parking, I think almost every street that has alternate side parking is Monday 6 p.m. to Tuesday 6 p.m. is the alternate side, which just isn't realistic for street sweeping purposes to sweep all of those streets on the same day. Specific to that schedule, another complication is the fact that our sweepers down. We have two street sweepers. One of them is pretty much dead as far as it's not economical to repair it anymore. So that's something we'll either have to replace or look to do something different with contractual sweeping. Street sweepers in general are high maintenance, and there tends to be a lot of downtime as you get later into their life, as these are. Also, another concern or issue is staffing. So we have competing priorities. We can't always have someone in the street sweeper every day as much as we'd like to. And then oftentimes if we have someone scheduled, there might be a breakdown now and then. It affects the schedule. So it's tough when you have one day per week for all of the alternate sides of those streets that have alternate side parking to really hit them on a regular schedule. In general, it takes a sweeper about 2 weeks to get through the entire city once. And obviously, every time they come across a parked car when they're going down that particular street, they're going around it. They're not going to get back there the next day. It's inefficient the way the system is set up now, and everything is not working together. So I think, the mayor had mentioned last year a priority for this year to be looking at our parking regulations citywide, and that was something we intended to have started by now. But I think given COVID and other issues that have come up, we haven't really had a chance to form our internal city team that will be looking at that. I think we need multiple departments to look at that together to kind of come up with a recommendation as to what direction we should go. When I say parking regulations citywide, that includes downtown as well as residential neighborhoods, and it could include looking at the feasibility of paid parking and whether we should implement that in certain areas, or parking permits, as Katie has suggested, as well as the snow winter time parking regulations. And then kind of, I think that needs to drive the whole conversation, and then the street sweeping needs to fit in, it need to be a consideration, but that shouldn't drive how parking is set up.
Greg, you said one of the street sweepers is non-fixable or just broken at the moment?
Broken, but it's down. Every time we take it out, there's an issue. It's not worth continuing to fix that. That's my understanding from Central Garage.
And that leaves us with one. And does that one get into the parking garage? Can it
not
get in?
Get in the parking garage. They don't fit. So what we've done in the past years, we had rented a sweeper or hired a smaller sweeper to come in and do the parking garage once per year. But in recent years, probably the last 2 years or so, we've been using one of those little tractors that we bought for sidewalk snow removal. We've got a broom on that. So they've been going around and with that, and as well as, hand brooms and stuff, cleaning up in there periodically.
Is that possible to use that as so we have 1.5 street sweepers?
No, it's not efficient at all for a street sweeping sort of thing. It doesn't have a vacuum. It's not sucking anything up like a street sweeper does. This is just a broom where they can push it in a pile and clean it up. We did budget for, in 2020, coming out of the equipment reserve, the highway equipment reserve, to purchase a small sidewalk scale street sweeper for downtown, which would go in the parking garage, and that could do Main Street along the curbs. Now we have to have our big street sweeper come in and do along there. That it can't make those radiuses on Main Street downtown. So we have someone come in early with it and push it out. If we had a smaller sweeper that could go on the sidewalk and along those curbs as well as in the parking garage, I think that would be a big benefit for our downtown. We haven't moved forward with that purchase yet. We haven't been able to find a piece of equipment that would suit our needs for that. We intended to go to a equipment expo this past spring. Obviously that didn't happen. So it's one of those things that's kind of been on the back burner, but we would still like to get that. And I think that would.
As I'm sure this won't surprise anybody here, maybe a year ago, we had a conversation about using Oak Street as a test street to do alternate side of the city parking in order to improve cleaning and improve snow removal. And that way, especially with the snow removal, people could still park on the street. You wouldn't have to clear the entire city when there were 2 inches of snow. And I believe it was ultimately, that idea was removed. Gary, is that true? Do you remember?
I do remember it. The idea never appealed much to me. I don't think it appealed to many people. It was that every person in the city would have to move their car from one side to the other every single day. To me, that wasn't something that was realistic to ask people to do.
So one of the things that I came across in my research of all of this was, I want to say it's in Buffalo, and I can check my notes. So Syracuse and Buffalo are the two cities that I looked into. They obviously have a great deal of snowfall every year. So there were a couple things from each city that I really liked. The Buffalo prioritizes the bus routes. So from November 1st to April 15th, from 1:30 to 7 a.m., you can't park along bus routes so that they can plow the bus routes, which I think is kind of cool. And then, and then also in Syracuse, I'm going to read what their website says. The city has identified priority streets for parking enforcement during snow events. These streets were selected using city data, including the percentage of multifamily dwellings, the width of the street, and other elements contributing. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Contributing to increased on-street parking. The city also included streets previously identified as problem points for for plow drivers. So they have a map on their website of streets that are kind of like important streets or whatever. And basically during a snow event, you just have to move your car off of that street, which I think would not be terrible, because you could say that, Center is for example, is a street that is like a main street. And then, your car would just have to be on one of those side streets. And then we could go from there. And I'm obviously going to mute because we're having a meltdown, but that's my contribution.
Thoughts? Mark Davies?
Well, I guess this question is for Greg. So, you just mentioned that you were thinking about this comprehensive parking regulation review by city staff, which of course was interrupted. Just the question, was that review, could that take into account some of the things that Katie's raising, sweeping, snow removal, density? I mean, we could add a whole lot of other things to that list as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it should. I think we would, Katie had asked me if we had a GIS map layer right now of our parking regulations. We don't have that completed. We had started that. But with our engineering vacancy, which hopefully will be filled soon, we'll be able to get back working on that, among other things. But I think adding in there, looking at the type, the width of the street, as she mentioned, and we have a lot of narrow streets in the city. It may not be a main street But something like Columbia Street, you can't have parking on that, or Washington Street when there's any significant snowfall that results in a snowbank. At some point, the plows can barely make it down those streets. So there's a lot of special cases you have to look at, or different characteristics of each street. I think housing density and could be another GIS layer to compare to the sweeping and the snow plowing map.
Since that seems to be a pretty important task, is that something, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Greg, but is that something that you think that you all will be able to pull off within the next 4 months or so? Or is there another way to maybe to move that along? Like maybe there's some city representatives as well as some kind of a committee of folks that review this. I'm just trying to think of ways to be able to make your job easier, but to be able to address some of these concerns as well.
I think the thing that would probably help us the most, if you did want to hire a consultant to assist with the effort, someone who, someone who does parking studies, that sort of thing, that could probably work with us and help in the technical side of things. But I'm not sure that you want to spend the money on that now either. And I don't know what it would cost, but I think having the engineering GIS technician will help out. I think obviously we need to have the police department involved, finance department, if we're going to be looking at any sort of paid parking or parking permits and figuring out how that would work, as well as DPW, fire department, with respect to street widths and that sort of thing with snow removal.
Mark Drenick? You're muted again.
I got it. Feeling my age right now. So question I've got is, we have a couple of colleges here that is there any way that we can put them into play to assist in, a very specific need that you might identify that'll help us get from point A to point B with this?
Possibly as a, maybe an intern would be helpful.
Well, I would think more than even an intern, not to.
Go ahead.
I think it's, I think it might be something that we can get a couple of kids from, maybe either college, if you were able to identify, kind of a specific task that their manpower would be an assist to us with. An intern is sometimes more work. I hate to say, but so what's your thinking, Craig?
I'm not sure if there's, just like labor-like tasks. I guess I'm not sure what they would do. Unless they had some. Go ahead, Gary. Your hand up.
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I didn't want to cut you off, Greg.
No, I'm not sure what they would do at this point. It's possible, but I'm not sure what.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm glad we're having this discussion. This was identified about a year ago as a really urgent issue to be addressed. We have a couple of different things, or more than a couple of things going on. One is the Deed Street Lofts project, which will change parking considerably. Two is the renovation of the municipal parking garage, which is going to change things. Three, the very difficult budget situation we're going to have as a result of COVID that we've always had, but it's going to get worse. The consideration of paid parking, which is something that has been on and off the back burner for considerable time. We're one of the only cities that you could find that doesn't have paid parking. And our current snow emergency regulation, which I've always found to be honestly a bit crazy, that if there's 2.5 inches of snow, everybody in the city has to take their car off the street. First of all, I don't know who came up with 2.5 inches. Probably there was a debate, 2 inches or 3 inches, and they compromised. But it just, everybody should not have to move their car in the entire city off the street when there's 2.5 inches of snow. We get 2.5 inches of snow here like nothing. So there's a lot of issues here that need to be addressed. And there are, parking is a science. As Greg mentioned, there are consultants that understand all of the things that go into parking, including the value of paid parking, snow removal, alternate side of the street parking, determining, density. There's a real science to that. And I know we try to do as much in-house as we can, but we take on an awful lot. We get ourselves backed up. This is something that needs to get done. It's important. I think we should at least look at what a consultant would cost us to do that. It would still require city's input because we know our city, Greg, police, everybody, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to provide all the information of what will work here and what not. But having a consultant who understands the science lead the effort is really necessary. It's very complex and it'll help us get it done.
So we've had lots of parking studies in the past. I don't believe we've had any regarding coordinating street cleaning and snow removal. Have we, Gary?
The only parking study that I'm aware of was the one we did as part of the comprehensive plan. And that was just a count of how many empty spaces we have on different times of the day, different days of the week.
I remember there was one quite a few years before that. Somebody else had their hand up. Was it Mark Davies? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, on that point about consultant, and Judy, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I recognize that money might be from the state might be a little difficult to come by, but have you in your kind of travels looking at different grants ever come across grants that would be available for this type of study or for studies that are vague enough that this could be fit into, or not the case?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to look. Greg, do you know of any? CDBG has some planning grants, but usually that's for like community planning. I don't know if something like this, which is more of a kind of in the infrastructure category, would be eligible or not. Greg, do you know if DOT has anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard anything like that. But I think, ultimately it depends on where you end up. But I think if you're going in the direction of paid parking, if it's done right with, I think it'd be valuable to have a consultant that deals with this sort of thing all the time. It is a complex issue and there's a lot of different pieces to it. And obviously the city staff has to be very much involved with that. If you had a consultant driving that effort, then it's most likely to be done well and in timely fashion. And, ultimately, if you go with paid parking, in some respect, that's going to help pay for this study. Look at it that way.
Well, I think we need to, there's a difference between paid parking and then parking permits. I think there's a lot of pieces here that we're discussing. And I know that in the past, we had paid parking temporarily, and that I think it could have been done better than it was. It was almost as if we were using 1990s technology to do something in the 21st century. So it was a little bit outdated. It was inconvenient. It was really cheap, but it was really inconvenient. But the parking permits in the residential neighborhoods was also something that has been discussed off and on. That I've always looked at that as it's almost the third rail with residents, even though they complain about parking in some cases, how difficult it is to park on their street. If you bring up using parking permits, then it's most people are really not happy to hear that because it's a limiting factor for everybody, including them, including, bringing people to their home at the holidays even.
So I would, just to piggyback onto that, Dave, Albany has visitor permits. And I think that you pay something like $5 one time to get a visitor permit. So just to solve kind of that issue. So I know I sent it today, and to be quite honest, everyone is saying this is a very multifaceted thing, and that's super true. I'm sure there are a ton of municipalities we could research and figure out what they do. I did some research literally today because I thought this planning meeting was going to be next week or the week after. And when I brought this up to Dave on Thursday, I was like, can you put it on the agenda? And so I did, I'd had all these thoughts rolling around, and then I looked into what some other people are doing in some research. But I'm sure that there are kind of answers out there to all of these questions. And maybe just to kind of piggyback on Mark Drenick's point, like maybe research is something that students could do on the city's behalf of what other municipalities are doing. Because I uncovered a lot of stuff in a couple hours, and I would just encourage everybody to read through that and kind of have some ideas from that as well.
Yeah, the visitor permits, that was discussed also. I was aware that other communities have done that. The more we're discussing this, I mean, I would kind of lean toward looking into a consultant to get the recommendations. We've done that for other things. This is a little bit different. But what does everybody think? Do we want to narrow our focus and try to attack one of these things? Or do we want to wait and look at a consultant, see how much that would cost us and see what they're going to give us? Len, you've been quiet over there. I know you're thinking.
So, Greg, out of all the parking studies that David mentioned earlier, have you read those?
It's been a while since I looked at the most recent one. I had looked at that, but I was not involved in it, and I would have to refresh myself on exactly what that says.
Yeah, I mean, before we pay for another binder to gather dust, there might be some interesting information in there that we could use. And then I'm sure you've seen the picture that Katie sent us today. The immediate thought process for me is, why didn't the DPW worker go down the opposite side of the street rather than try and weave between those cars? Because this is something that I heard continually when I was out on the campaign trail, of why our city staff continually do the exact same thing that Katie sent a picture of. And I see Mark Drenick shaking his head. So maybe we could start there initially. And then if you have any of these parking studies that we could take a look at, I agree with Gary, we're probably going to have to hire a consultant.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I completely understand, Len. I think we've all been thinking that same thing. But I think that Greg had said that it's really a staffing issue. And with the alternate side of the street parking that we have now, you're only talking a couple days that they're going to be on the opposite side, and before they've got to move back again. And it's not enough time to get the entire city when we've only got one sweeper. So, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. I think the way to maybe go at this, though, is, I mean, maybe we do want to change the alternate side of the street parking. Look what other cities are doing. Like, I'm not sure what New York does. I know New York City, they have it, but I don't remember how often they switch. I don't know that it's every single night. And do we want to invest in another full-size street sweeper to cut our time in half? So instead of 2 days getting the whole city done, we can get the whole city done in one day.
I think Greg said it currently takes 2 weeks because we're down to one street sweeper. But with that said,
2 weeks. I apologize. You're right. It was 2 weeks.
Looking at the picture, though,
worse.
whether the DPW staff agreed with the day of the week or not, all the vehicles are on the right-hand side of that street, and the leaves are still sitting on the left side. We should have just swept the left side and call it good.
I can't speak to exactly what street they were driving down or whether they turned around and went down the other side after that. Obviously, there's some variability in the operator, how they do about it. I know we had created maps for each section of the city as what route to take, but things vary in the field. And to be clear, you know, having two sweepers, we never have two sweepers out on the street at the same time. Well, I shouldn't say never, but we never consistently for 2 weeks or 1 week have them out. We just don't have the people for that. It's typically we have two sweepers because one of them is always down because they're that high maintenance. And sometimes we would have a second sweeper go out and be cleaning catch basins. Also, the new truck that we bought this past year, the sewer jet vac truck, that's also capable and more efficient at cleaning out catch basins in some cases. So our plan was to look at whether we really need two sweepers all the time or just one, supplemented by renting a second one like in April and in October, parts of the year that are heaviest sweeping times, you know, the initial winter and the fall. You know,
right. And Greg, given the shortage on staff, do you think this is an opportunity for us to have shared services with maybe the town?
The town doesn't have, well, they actually have a very old sweeper they bought from the city. And I think that's probably on its last legs. They actually use our sweeper through shared services at times. We go and sweep some of their streets. We do the same thing with some of the other towns. I think Lawrence now and then we send our sweeper over there. So I don't think there's much for the city to gain from shared services for sweeping.
Mark Dronick, you've had your hand up.
Yes, so a couple of things. So the transit hub is going to require maintenance. One of the things that we were concerned about was, legacy costs and so forth and so on. And so knowing that we're going to be able to have that maintained properly, a street sweeper that fits into that parking garage would make a ton of sense. And then that's the street sweeper that we're able to use downtown on the sidewalks. I know, we're still looking at how that's going to come together in terms of that budget, but that might be a place from which we can find ourselves a small sweeper. And I don't know what the timeline would be on that, but it might be potentially timely enough to be able to help out. The other thing was not to beat a dead horse, but one of the things that I think the colleges could provide is survey information, data information that would be a big help to somebody that we bring in as a consultant, surveying where the folks don't move their cars. Because, one of the big concerns that we have heard, certainly, and I'm sure you all have from constituents in the winter, is that snow piles up because people don't move their cars, and we just don't have the enforcement to really ensure that everybody does move their cars. And so you wind up with problem streets, and they're institutionally problem streets, and maybe having some of that identified along with obviously the high traffic routes of the buses and so forth and so on. Having that identified through means that don't cost money, but maybe are potentially something donated by the colleges would be something that would, defray costs of a consultant.
Gary?
I just want, when we talk about street sweepers, keep in mind the importance of them goes beyond sweeping the streets. As we've become more and more dependent upon chip sealing as a way of maintaining our roads, I believe we need the street sweepers in order to clear the gravel. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah.
And I know that this summer, there are streets like Elm Street and some others where the gravel hasn't been removed now for about 6 weeks. And that's, ongoing dust problem. It's a hazard for bicycles or motorcyclists. And the lack of availability of staff or a street sweeper, impacts that as well. So it's obviously a piece of equipment that we've become dependent upon and need to treat it as such.
Agreed. So where do we want to go with this? I don't know that I want to debate parking permits or alternate side of the street parking or anything like that. I think there's too many decisions, too many choices. I would lean toward the consultant, as I said before.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think a consultant is where we're going to need to go. It's just a case of how much can we help to ensure that it doesn't cost us an arm and a leg.
And Len, I agree with you about not letting old studies collect dust. The previous study to the one that was just done that I was referring to, I believe is like 15 years old, maybe even 20 years old. I don't know that it was written to address this though, with the parking permits and such. I see no harm in digging it out, but I'm not sure if I don't know how much help an old study is going to be. Thoughts from anybody else? Mark?
Yeah, so I think this question is for Greg and for Mayor Herzig. Greg, I think I heard you say that someone like a consultant could facilitate basically city staff and having these discussions, as well as obviously bring the obvious research and kind of understanding of this. I think I might know the answer to this question, but just wanted to hear it from either one of you two. Is this something that a city manager could, or administrator, whatever, could facilitate, or is this require an expertise that even with the city manager in place would require some kind of level of consultant to be able to do this right?
I think, from my perspective, I would value the expertise that a consultant who does this sort of thing would bring, as well as the helping organize and facilitate. And I like to think that we can, certainly we are capable of doing this in-house, but you can say that about a lot of things, and we do say that about a lot of things. As the mayor says, we have a lot of competing priorities, and I think if it's just one of those things that the reason we haven't gotten it done to date is because we just haven't had the time, the commitment to it. We can move it up the priority list, but I do think that a consultant would help.
Well, I'd be supportive of at least exploring what the potential cost of this kind of consulting would be. Are we talking 5,000? Are we talking 50,000? I'd like to understand that a little bit more before saying one way or another. I certainly think that we are in a position where we need to be very careful how we spend. I also recognize that there's a lot of, this impacts a lot of areas. Parking regulations can impact a lot of areas, and potentially it can impact our revenue as well. So I think it's worthwhile to look at. So I want to make sure it doesn't cost us too much.
Understood. I would just say as well that as far as cost goes, ultimately this would lead to more costs if we end up changing signage because the regulations all change. So we want to make sure we get it right.
Right. Go ahead, Len.
So Mark, what topics would you be looking for or from the consultant?
Good question, Len. I
'Cause
guess
I agree with you. I think cost is going to be an overwhelming factor. And I was thinking of signage also, and then whatever new technology we put into place, it's all going to cost us money. And I know that you're right in step with the fact where we're headed with this 2021 budget. But I just wanted to hone in on, if we're going to do a consultant, what are the topics that we're going to look at?
Yeah, I think that would certainly be part of how we would go about looking at it, is defining what that role would be. I think certainly cost would be certainly one of them. One, two, Katie brings up the question of parking permits. I think I'd like to understand the impact on those. Three, I think a comprehensive analysis of our parking overlay in terms of, the mayor brought it up with the Deed Street project, with the parking garage, with and Katie alluded to the density in particular areas. So I think those three would at least be, well, grouping those last three together would be the things I'd want to most look at. And then certainly I think, relying upon the expertise of Greg and others within the city who might have some other things to add to this list that would be important. I'd certainly defer to them to add to that list. So yeah, we're talking about a lot of things. This probably is not a simple study. I recognize that, Len.
Well,
Absolutely. And then I just would like to get snow in there because of the tighter streets. I think Gary and others have brought it up multiple times. Mark Trennick's brought it up. We need to look at snow removal. I might suggest, based on cost, that we leave out the overall parking, as in the parking garage and the loft effect, but we can take a look at it and see where we're at.
Well, go ahead, Gary.
I was just going to say, of course, there's no free money, and wherever you take money from, it's someplace else that it could be used. But, when and if Lofts and Deed Street goes through, Ken Carney is going to be leasing spaces from us in the parking garage at the tune of about $50,000 a year. We could earmark 1 year of that income, which was nothing that we expected, to be used towards parking studies, et cetera.
I would like to think that if we decide to do this, that the consultant would be able to take the previous parking study that we have, which included counting of every space in Oneonta, and coordinating that and adding to that, whether it's feasible to do a resident parking permit with this size city, with also coordinating the street sweeping and the snow removal, and finding the best way to do it in, like I said, this size city as well. Katie, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what I think is a practical question, which is, what do we do? What's plan B if a consultant we decide is too much money to spend at this time? Like, what are practical steps, kind of what Mark Drenick was getting to that we can take to improve the situation without spending money in case a consultant is not in the cards for
In a
this
case
year?
like that, I would rely on talking to Greg and his staff to see what's the most feasible. Because I know, for example, DPW is about half the staff that they used to be years ago, and there's only so much they can do. But I would rely on Greg and his staff to see what can change, what can be more efficient, and go from there. Anybody want to add anything to that? So, Gary, where do we go from here if we're going to look at looking into a consultant?
We can do some research. We can start with the consultant that we hired to do the last parking study. They were up in Glens Falls, I believe, and do some other research as to who's out there who does this. Shouldn't be hard to ask around, see what we learn, see what people do, see what they charge. Doesn't cost us anything to do a little exploration.
So we're not going to put a bid out or anything like that, just to see what's out there, see what comes back.
Yeah, that's what I would do. That's what I would do. I mean, at this point, let's just talk to people. People, I'm sure, would be happy to take a ride over and talk to us if there was a potential job here.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Katie. I think this is the beginning of the conversation. So, okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to the part on that discussion? Okay. I had removed the economic development from the agenda for now. And I sent an email out to everybody with my thoughts were on it. I didn't want you to think that I didn't think it was a topic for discussion necessarily, but I think we need to step back a little bit because I think there's a lot of moving parts right now. I want to think first of what are our goals, number one. We have a lot of moving parts, like we have new housing that's potentially coming here between Deet Street and Deet Street Lofts, the Ford Block building that I know that the Springbrook is looking at purchasing. We also have more housing that's being built further down on Main Street toward the East End. Survive and Thrive marketing committee is going to have their own report that's going to be coming out now. We also have Destination Oneonta, and regardless of how we all feel about the job they're doing, Oneonta Now does have things happening. Just don't know what they are. But we also don't know what other similar sized communities within New York do to address the same goals that we haven't even discussed yet. And what tools do we currently have that could then address the goals that we're even talking about? And at that point, I would say, well, what's missing? And we can fill in the blanks at that point, or we could at least look to see what we need to do to fill in the blanks. So I think that if we want to have a discussion today, I mean, absolutely. But I'd want to start with what exactly are we looking to accomplish? Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question, and I've been thinking about it too. It's um, first of all, the title economic developer, I feel like we need to rethink that, because that's not really a description of the job that we're looking for. We have an economic developer. I think we need to talk about that to begin with. And we need to talk about how anything that either a person or an agency or whatever it may be winds up hired to do, if they're in fact hired to do it, that they are connected to all of the various potentials that Judy has already established for, connection to all the programs that we have, all the ways that we can streamline the processes. She's already got so much of this built. So we've got essentially something that we need to, we need a conduit to that. And what that conduit looks like, I'm not certain, but that person or a company, that's as much of a part of the job as anything, is coordinating to maximize everything that Judy's already, got pulled together here. The other thing is that there are a lot of villages and or cities of, our size or maybe a little bit larger that have experimented with this regionally, and some have failed with stuff and some have succeeded with stuff. And I feel like it would really be smart to take a month and everybody just identify, and Dave, you could coordinate it, identify some place to reach out to that has a position similar to this, and see, what the pitfalls were to start with, and what they were able to accomplish, or if they had to switch gears or horses in midstream or whatever may have been and then beyond that, I think it's important that we determine, we don't have any money to spend right now. We want to be in a position where we're asking very little from our constituents in terms of taxes. So we want to look at, how can we do this most effectively and efficiently? And it may be that a compensation by way of commission has been something that has worked for other people, and maybe it hasn't. I know in my own company that it doesn't always work. So I feel like there's research that needs to be done, but I do feel like it's an important thing to discuss. I wouldn't back burner this at all. I think we need to pull this together because the marketing committee, as you said, from the Survive and Thrive task force, they're this close now. I was just on a meeting this morning. They're this close to being able to identify somebody that they can task with taking the information that the infrastructure committee put together and the marketing committee has been working on, and start to roll this out to be promotional of our community. And if they're successful, and we obviously hope that they are, they need to be connective to some agent of some sort that can then, as I said, connect with Judy and also be responsible for their own, marketing of the assets that are being pulled together. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So, Mark, are you saying you said to take a month to identify the pitfalls? Can you?
No, I say, we do this monthly. Let's spend some time. It could be tomorrow, but let's get connected with some of the communities in upstate, ideally, that have hired a person that is doing the job that we think that we're looking for, and see, how that's worked for them, how it came about, how much they're paying, what the type of payment is. Is it a small salary and some benefits, or commission, or is it something entirely different? What's succeeded, what's failed? We don't have that information, as far as I know. I don't have that information. So I feel like if each one of us just connected with a community that has experimented with this, maybe successfully, then we have something we can discuss, determine some best practices and follow, a breadcrumb trail from there.
So go ahead, Len.
So Mark, you said the marketing committee from Survive and Thrive is close because they're using the information from the infrastructure committee.
they've been using that. They at this point have put out requests for proposals locally and regionally, and gotten several in, and are very close to making a decision about some group that has a local mindset, if not geography, and hopefully both. So they're getting very close to being able to begin implementation of the marketing strategy that came of their using the infrastructure and other, other information that was put together.
And so, Mark, just so that I understand this, the infrastructure committee, they've expounded upon the list of 21 liabilities and assets that they had come up with a month or two ago, somewhere
I'll
in
let
there.
you talk to that, Dave.
Yeah, we basically gave assets and liabilities over to the marketing committee. We haven't met as a group since we've done that, but I was under the assumption what the marketing committee was going to be doing is taking that information to look to marketing the specific groups that they thought would potentially move to the area.
That's exactly right.
So I guess this comes back to my thought is, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're looking to do, but I feel like we may be talking about multiple things here. What are our goals? I mean, are we talking about bringing people here? Are we looking to are we looking to have somebody bring people here, somebody to bring business here? Like, what are we looking to?
So let me make the distinction between what the marketing committee from the Survive and Thrive group as prioritized versus what this potential position would be looking at. And the Survive and Thrive marketing folks are more looking at a population, adjustment upward from, of folks potentially that bring their own jobs with them, telecommuters. And I think secondarily, I think, Judy, you're in on that conversation. So you tell me if I'm misreading it. But I think secondarily, the priority would be attracting businesses. I feel that, their focus is on our thriving. They're not looking to become, as an agency or a group that's handling the marketing, some conduit for individual outreach to potential businesses. I don't think anybody sees it that way. However, if it happens, then obviously that it goes right to Judy at this moment, and as it should. I think what this group, and I might be wrong, but I think what this group is looking at, generally speaking, in terms of economic development, and I don't like that terminology because Judy's already got that. But as someone who is, facilitating the capture of new business or relocating business, is exactly that. They're looking at putting people, in retail locations, businesses in retail locations, or on second floors, or in expanded opportunities, in and around Oneonta. There's, new construction is always a possibility, obviously, as well. So I feel like that's the thing that's not currently, who's got time for that right now? So that's the piece I think we're talking about here.
Gary?
This is one of the situations where everybody is right. And, marketing is part of economic development. Housing is part of economic development. Grant writing is part of economic development. Community building, quality of life, recruiting businesses, recruiting people to live here. They're all important components, and no one person is going to do them all. So I think Mark is on the right path with exploring what other communities are doing. And not only other communities, we have several economic development organizations in this region, which we can contact. There's Mohawk Valley Edge, up in the northern part of this region. There's Southern Tier 8 down in the Binghamton area. Of course, we have Otsego Now, who is here. We have cities in this region, whether it's Utica, Rome, Amsterdam, Binghamton. I would be happy to help coordinate if we got a group of people that want to really dig into this and talk to the experts out there and try and narrow down what's most important to us and how to obtain it, I would be happy to work with that group to help coordinate putting them in contact with people who are either in the economic development business or other municipalities.
Mark?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about this since it first came up, and I think I'm on the same track. If reaching out to folks, if doing what Mark is asking you to kind of do the background research, to me, if this all is a much more comprehensive approach, I mean, so we're not just talking about bringing new businesses, we're talking about housing. We might need to talk about taxes and how we might be able to offer incentives for people to be able to purchase homes and fix them up. I think there needs to be a comprehensive examination of everything. What's all the pieces of this puzzle, so that that we can put together a comprehensive plan to address all the different elements, to attract businesses, to attract people, to keep them here, to make sure that we are incentivizing them, purchasing homes and staying in these homes. So while I appreciate an economic developer, I think it's one piece of a package that we might want to look at, and maybe it's not even that. Maybe we use committee, but I think it's part of a package. I don't want to piecemeal this. We need to look at the holistic approach and how we can best address all these issues.
So we're thinking, I want to go back to what Gary was saying about, was it Southern Tier 8 Mohawk Valley Edge? Is that correct, Gary? Did I get those written down right? So you're talking about potentially coordinating with them to see what they recommend, what they did in their regions?
Well, I don't want to do all the legwork here, but if there's a group of people, 2 or 3 people that want to dig into this and put time into it, I will help put them in touch with people, whether it's people at other municipalities. For example, I know the city of Utica has a city marketer, not a marketer. Yeah, I think it's a city marketer. I don't know exactly what that entails, but I would be happy to call Mayor Rob Palmieri and put people in touch with him and find out what he does and what other support he's able to get. So if there's 2 or 3 people who want to dig into this, I will serve as a liaison, putting them in touch with people in different organizations or municipalities.
Anybody in? Oh, Mark?
Hey, May,
Oh, your hand up first. Hold on, Len.
Just one more point. I thank you, Mayor, for offering those ideas and offering to kind of liaison on that. But I would also just suggest something that's come to mind is that it might be really valuable to us as a council or as a city to have a greater communication with Otsego Now, so that we're able to understand projects they're working on. And it seems to me that sometimes potential partners come along that might not be a good fit for one project, but maybe by us being more communicating with them more often, that partner that might not be a good fit for one project might be a good partner for something else. And so by having that communication, we can play a greater role in facilitating, hopefully, folks meeting and kind of be that conduit to be able to get folks talking and not just in the same normal spaces. So just throwing it out there. Sorry, Len.
I would agree with you, Mark, on that. And I mean, I don't know if Jody can, but maybe a quarterly meeting with us or a quarterly report with us, even if it's just showing up to the council and giving us news on what's happening. Because what was it, right before COVID, we met with him, and I think that was the first time I'd actually sat down to see what they were working on. And it was really helpful and educational, and it made me feel like they were worth it. So Gary, is that something that we could coordinate, or can you coordinate with Jody, see if he can get on, that we can get him on the agenda of the council meetings?
Yeah, I'm sure we can. I'm sure he'd be happy to do it. I'll touch base with him and ask him. At one time I went to every board meeting and some of the committee meetings at Otsego Now. honestly, I stopped going because they became not very Oneonta focused, and I didn't find it was still a good use of my time. But I agree, let's get Jody to a council meeting. Let's set up a regular schedule. I think that's a good idea, Dave.
Len, sorry. I knew we'd get to you finally.
No worries. Mark and Mark, what do you guys think that we could just utilize this committee, divide up the work? To Mark Drennick's point, you're taking it a month. So our next meeting in a month, we could take this workload and divide it between the three of us, four of us, and chip away at this a little bit.
If I have a really clear focus and task, I can chip away.
Yeah, I'd be glad to be the identification of who we're speaking with. Maybe we would just all email coordinate or run through Dave. I'm leery about how much we do in email.
I agree. I would agree with you on that, Mark. And if this is a matter of a lot of travel over the next month, that might be difficult. At least for me,
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
What about Zoom meetings?
Exactly. But
Agreed.
in any case,
Zoom meeting.
yeah. So what I'm saying though, Dave, is should we all just kind of brainstorm individually and then roll through you for essentially a go ahead so that we don't end up stepping on one another's toes, or are we comfortable communicating all of this broadly, or?
Whatever you guys want to do, it's okay with me. Whatever works. But I think, yeah, we absolutely don't want to be stepping on each other's toes. Do we want to pick out certain municipalities that we want to contact?
We could draw. There are what, 4 of us? We could draw a line, both horizontally and vertically through Oneonta, and each one take a quadrant. And whatever the heck city or village or whatever might fall within, that's somebody to.
Well, maybe I don't want to be throwing a dart against the wall with my eyes closed.
Sure.
So are there recommendations of municipalities or groups?
I don't know who. Yeah, I have no idea who's doing this. I think it's a lot of cold calls. The mayor has already mentioned Utica. There's somebody there we know we can talk to.
Well, that's what I was alluding to was, Gary, do you have other communities or groups that you would recommend besides Utica?
It's not a matter of who's doing this, because there may be people who tried it and are not doing it for a good reason, and you want to talk to them as well.
Right.
So, I would look at Utica, I'd look at Rome, I'd look at Amsterdam, I'd look at Gloversville, I'd look down at the Binghamton and surrounding small cities there. These are all, and I would also talk to the economic development organizations, Otsego Now, Southern Tier 8, Mohawk Valley Edge.
So as crazy as it sounded, I still feel like if we took a quadrant geographically, we wouldn't step on one another's toes, and we would do, the research. Like, I wouldn't have thought of Amsterdam, for instance, but you look at the map to the north and east of us and you say, oh, yeah. Do you want to just do it that way? Northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest, however that works.
It's up to you. I mean, we could even just divvy up what we have here. And if somebody else comes up with another municipality that they think might be something they should contact based on who they've already talked to, you just let everybody know.
Either way. Who do we have here currently? Have you been making a list?
Yeah, we've got Utica, Rome, Amsterdam, Gloversville, Otsego Now, Mohawk Valley Edge, Southern Tier 8. Otsego Now is the easy one. So we take that one out. I mean, that gives us 6.
Mm-hmm.
If we go with the bigger communities, I'm not sure how far we're going to get without a very specific person to talk to.
Well, I'm willing to give a shot to as much as, I can give a shot to over the course of next month. I think it's important we get, like the mayor was saying, some folks may not be doing it at all, and there's a good reason we want to hear that too. We can benefit by knowing where people failed.
I still feel like we're discussing a very broad.
We are, but I think everybody will have figured out I think people will have narrowed it down for themselves, and even comparing that information would be helpful.
Dave, if you don't mind, if you could just maybe take a few minutes later today or tomorrow and just kind of divide up the workload and let us know where you want us to go with this. I mean, as chair of the committee, that way you're the apex of information.
Well, if I can do that, I can certainly just divide up the names I've got in front of me. That's 6 groups. It's a matter of are there other ones that people are thinking of? I mean, do we want to add? I don't know if we want to add Binghamton to that.
I would suggest Troy. Similar in terms of having a college within their downtown.
And even Delhi, I don't know
Yeah.
whether or not even a smaller community like Delhi, might have dabbled with this.
Casanova.
I almost feel like you go down Route 28. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Judy has her hand up.
Ogdensburg is another one. Go ahead, Judy.
So I'm not clear on exactly what you want out of this effort. And I think that's probably where you need to start, like define what it is that you're actually looking to accomplish, before you contact these others. And the other ones I just wanted to point out, Amsterdam has their secret weapon of Angelo Santa Barbara, their assemblyman, who has been getting them money hand over fist lately. And Troy has the market, which even in COVID is bringing in 4,500 people every Saturday. Their Troy Farmers Market. So they all have, or a lot of them will have little things or big things that we don't necessarily have. But I think I need a better idea of what this effort is to accomplish.
That's what I've been saying. I feel like we have an octopus here, and we're trying to generalize it. And I'm afraid I'm going to pick up the phone, and I'm not really sure what I'm asking, what information I'm looking for.
So my
Can I make
sense
a
of it is
suggestion?
that no one that I'm aware of in the city, as hardworking as they are, and my gosh, everybody is, it's very impressive, has the time to now invent one more version of themselves to go out and be a solicitor. And if this marketing effort of the Survive and Thrive group is successful and generates any kind of connection of business interest, for somebody to take on the job of essentially being that conduit, that's asking somebody to add, and that somebody, frankly, is you, Judy, to add another 20 hours to your life, and that's not fair. I feel like we need somebody. I see it as a pretty clear hole that needs to be filled, and that hole is, the connection to Judy, all of the programs that she's built. As Mark Davies has said, we have to look at this holistically too, and see if there are other avenues, of red tape express essentially, that we can identify that will speed processes along for would-be business. So that by definition is what we're looking at. We're looking at somebody to essentially be in the place that nobody else has time to be, and hopefully then be able to bring some retail, restaurants, second floor businesses, outside of Oneonta business. You know, I don't know, outside of what we're talking about, who we would identify to do that job that isn't currently working 60 hours or 70 hours a week.
So you're
Mark,
talking about having a business recruiter is what you're talking about.
That's a very good title. Maybe that's it,
Gary?
but yes.
I'm going to go back to about 7-8 years ago. Otsego County as a county was in the same place where you are now talking about this, and they couldn't figure out where to go. You remember that Senator Seward put together actually 2 economic development summits. What he did was he brought in 2 or 3 economic developers and a county that had a lot of success to start talking about what it takes and what has worked elsewhere and what this area needs. That actually is what led to the rebirth of Otsego Now and bringing in Sandy Mathis that came out of those Jim Seward summits. So you know, it's very similar. I would start with getting 1 or 2 experts in the field, people who are economic developers, who've had some success, who've worked with various different communities. That's a starting point. Speaking with them, telling them what our weaknesses are, what we need, what our weak areas are, what our strengths are, hearing from them their advice as to what direction would be most beneficial for us to proceed in. I mean, I'd be happy to do my best to find and identify a couple of people like that to start with, to speak to, for you to speak with. And again, and somebody mentioned, I think Judy mentioned, every community is different. You know, Mark mentioned Troy, and Troy is a great example in a lot of ways for us to look at. But on the other hand, they're very different. They have 2 million people within 20 minutes of their downtown. And so that changes everything. You know, everything they do is very different than what we do. When we have, you know, within 20 minutes of our downtown, we have 50,000 people, you know, they have 2 million. So that, you know, is a big difference.
So you're talking about bringing somebody to us then, correct? Or Zooming with us?
We'll just have to reach out and talk and see how it works out.
So what do we want to do here, folks?
I agree with Gary. We need to start a conversation with successful economic developers. He gave us 2 suggestions. I'm willing to make a phone call with Mohawk Valley Edge. If somebody else wants to do Southern Tier 8, that would be great. And we'll start going. We have to start somewhere, Dave.
Yep. Okay. And we have Otsego Now coming at hopefully at the next council meeting or somewhere soon. Gary, if you give me contact information for Southern Tier 8, I will give them a call and talk to them. Does anybody else want to make any calls, or do we want to start with those 2 groups?
I have no problem making calls. I still feel like I'd like to know exactly what questions I should be asking. I you know, feel like it's just very open-ended at this point, but I think that's something we could work together on the backside to formulate a couple of broad questions that might be able to allow us all to ask similar questions to be able to at least guide the conversation.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think with permission, I'm going to just make a couple of calls to some like-sized communities, and just maybe I don't have the specifics, but you know, to get a general sense of the question and see how they might kind of recalibrate the specifics by way of whatever it is that they may have done or not done, and I can bring that back.
Do we want to coordinate questions online first before we make calls?
I'm happy to do that.
I'm sorry, what was that, Mark?
I said I'm happy to do that, sure.
Okay. Okay. You guys want to send them to me, I guess? I can compile them and then send them back out?
Sure.
So, okay. All right. Anything else, guys? Okay. Hopefully the questions that we're asking will narrow this focus a little bit. So, all right. Gary, do you have anything to add? Okay. Any other business, guys? Okay. All right. Thanks.